The Ghost That Killed the Bride, presented by Absolutely Haunted. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, we appreciate you. Would you ever get married in a haunted house? Sounds romantic, right? A little gothic, a little mysterious, until you realize some spirits don't like sharing the spotlight. My cousin Bethany thought it would be the perfect setting for her dream wedding. She never expected to pay the price for it, and I don't mean with money. Look, as maid of honor and someone who loves Bethany to the moon and back, I say this with nothing but honesty. If anyone in the history of weddings deserved the title of Bridezilla, it was Bethany. She didn't just stress us out, she practically had us all on the verge of a collective breakdown. But no one suffered more than her parents. She dragged them across 2 entire states, clocking in at least 100 miles, just to tour every, and I do mean every, possible venue for her perfect day. And guess what? Not a single one was good enough. Apparently it was then that she decided her best bet would be to surf the internet on her hunt for the most elegant, upscale venue she could find. That's when she found Ashcroft Manor. It had recently opened as a venue to the public and was only 15 miles from her own hometown. Armed with this information, she convinced her parents to accompany her to look at one last venue. Her father was worn down from visiting all the places they had already been to. "I have warned her that this is it," he stated. "If she does not like this one, then her mother and I will make the choice for her, out of one of the many places we have already visited." Needless to say, this poked the Bridezilla. She had a death grip on her wedding plans and was not appreciative of anyone who was of a different opinion. "Daddy," she said coolly, "if you choose one of those places, I would not show up." She reached out and straightened his tie. "How would it look to everyone if I didn't show up and word got out how you ruined my wedding and my life?" She sashayed away without a backward glance. I almost fell off my chair when I overheard that exchange. Mr. Powers stood staring after her almost in disbelief. But from the redness of his neck around his collar, I would also say there was a healthy bit of anger mixed in too. I personally thought she was lucky. She had an unusual date for her wedding, as it meant there were many more places available. What exactly did she think she was looking for? I had no idea. The date was January 18th. She had not chosen it randomly. She had chosen it to honor her grandparents' anniversary, and so it just so happened to be a Monday. Monday is not a normal day to choose to wed, so a lot of the venues had openings. While we walked Ashcroft, I could tell she was falling in love. It was not long before the paperwork and contracts were signed. Bethany turned to me and said, "The minute I arrived I just knew this was it. This is the right place," she squealed. The minute I saw that grand double staircase, I could see myself floating down it. I knew it was a done deal. Turning to me, "Don't you think it will make the most amazing entrance, Kelly?" "It will," I agreed. She was not wrong, it was sumptuous. But then came the snag. As Bethany laid out her grand vision, she explained to the owner exactly how she wanted the ceremony to unfold. She would descend the staircase on the far side, the one farthest from the grand ballroom doors, while her father took the opposite staircase. They would meet in the center at the foot of the stairs, and from there, he would escort her into the ballroom for the ceremony. She expected the usual negotiations, maybe a few logistical concerns, but what she didn't expect was the owner's reaction. The moment she mentioned the staircase, his expression changed. His easygoing demeanor vanished, replaced by something colder, heavier. Without hesitation, he shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "The grand staircase is off limits." And just like that, the fight was on. For every argument Bethany made, every insistence that her vision had to be just so, the owner pushed back, subtly yet firmly, trying to steer her away from her plan. The negotiation stretched on for nearly 2 hours, a tense back and forth that finally ended when Bethany, in full Bridezilla mode, threatened to pull the venue entirely. Without a word, the owner slid the check back across the desk to Mr. Powers, and, with deliberate finality, tore the contract in two. Bethany froze, her outrage momentarily eclipsed by sheer disbelief. Mr. Powers looked just as perplexed as his daughter, who, seething, shot to her feet and stormed out to the car. "I don't understand," Mr. Powers murmured, watching the man carefully. The owner sighed, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said at last. "And it's not something I'm prepared to explain. But I cannot have a bride descend those stairs. In my family, sir, it simply isn't done." We left Ashcroft feeling dejected. Bethany because she did not get her way. Mr. Powers because he was afraid of how many more venues he was going to have to go to. And I because she was going to be a nightmare and whiny for hours now. But I dare say that the owner of Ashcroft did not look happy either. At the way things turned out, it was a big wedding, and big weddings bring big money. Houses like Ashcroft are a constant financial drain on their owners. I felt sorry for the man, but I did wonder at his refusal to budge on the stair point. I turned and looked out the window and let the thought slip away, when we get back to the Powers house I am going to make an excuse and go to my own apartment. A couple days later she called me on cloud 9 cause the owner of Ashcroft had phoned her father and told him that if they were still interested in the venue, he would against his better judgment allow her to use the staircase. She was so excited to have gotten her way. I wonder if today she looks back on it and wishes she had left well enough alone? I also wonder why the owner had changed his mind. Later I found out that in the 2 days since we had been to Ashcroft the owner had been given the bill for the new roof. The money was greatly needed. Yet he still had never divulged the reason he had not wanted the staircase used. If someone had asked, things would have not turned so dire. I have never wanted 6 months to fly by so fast, as I did the ones leading up to her big day, and I have to admit I was delighted myself when the actual event began. I am not joking when I say she was the worst bride I had ever had to deal with. We gathered in the large suite at the top of the double staircase. The bride was beautiful, her long blonde hair gathered high and curled upon her head, the long white veil hanging down. The perfect white wedding gown with its massive train. Primped, preened and set aglow, the bride was ready to make her debut. The soft strains of wedding music drifted through the grand halls of Ashcroft, a delicate whisper weaving through the air. At the top of the left-hand staircase, Bethany stood poised, radiant and ready. Below, the wedding videographer adjusted his camera, positioning himself at the base of the stairs. He was determined to capture every perfect moment of the bride and groom's special day. Every step, every smile, every breath of this once-in-a-lifetime event. He had no idea he was about to film a nightmare. Bethany stood at the top of the grand staircase, a vision of lace and satin, her veil catching the soft glow of the chandelier above. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, mindful of the cascading train that pooled behind her like a whisper of clouds. Below, the bridesmaids and groomsmen glided gracefully through the towering double doors, their steps in perfect harmony as they entered the grand ballroom, past the sea of waiting guests. A hush of anticipation filled the air. At the altar, her fiancé, her soon-to-be husband, turned, drawn by an unshakable pull. As the doors swung wide, his breath hitched. There she was, luminous and waiting, poised for her descent. The videographer captured everything, every haunting second of it. But it would be nearly a year before he could bring himself to watch the footage. And when he finally did, he wished he never had. The screen flickered to life, replaying the moment in agonizing detail. Bethany stood at the top of the stairs, radiant, oblivious. Then, sudden motion. Her body lurched forward, violently, unnaturally, as if unseen hands had shoved her. Frame by frame, he watched her feet leave the steps. The sheer terror in her wide, disbelieving eyes. The scream that tore through the air. And then impact. Her neck twisted at a sickening angle as it struck the edge of the stairs. A crack echoed through the stillness, followed by the impossible stillness of her body. Blood pooled, seeping into the white satin of her gown. The camera had caught it all, the fall, the break, the final, empty stare of her lifeless eyes. And in the shadows just beyond the staircase, something moved. It happened so fast, mere seconds, too quick for his mind to even register that he should stop filming. Frozen in disbelief, he kept the camera rolling, capturing everything, the room erupting into chaos. The piercing screams of Bethany's mother and grandmother. Her father, rushing forward, scooping her lifeless body into his arms, though there was nothing he could do. The groom stumbling toward her, only to collapse before he could even reach her. And still, the camera rolled, recording every horrifying moment, until, finally, reality crashed back in, and with trembling hands, he shut it off. All of us have been grieving. That day is forever etched into my mind, along with the horrors or what I saw when I heard the scream and heart racing, turned back to witness the tragedy of losing my big cousin. I grieved unbelievably hard for her. Sure, she had been a royal pain over the last 6 months, but I loved that girl so much and the loss is immense to me. I realized several months later with sorrow that Bethany's grandparents' anniversary would forever be marred, and I cried for them too. Their only granddaughter had died on their anniversary getting married. A year passed. Life moved on, or at least, it tried to. Then, out of the blue, the videographer called me. His voice was tense, hesitant. He had dug my number out of his files since I was the one who had paid his bill. Not his fault, after all. The accident wasn't on him, and I knew Bethany's parents were in no state to deal with anything. So, I had covered the cost and told him to keep the video. I wanted nothing to do with it. But now, he needed to see me. Urgently. There's something important you need to watch, he said. Dread curled in my stomach, but I agreed to stop by his office on my lunch break. I never made it back to work that day. After seeing what he showed me, my hands were shaking too much to dial my boss properly. When I finally managed, all I could say was, I'm not coming back in today. I can't. When I arrived, the man greeted me with a solemn nod, thanking me for coming. His voice was gentle but heavy with something unspoken. You'll want to be sitting down for this, he warned. I didn't question him, just the weight in his eyes was enough to tell me he meant it. And then, the video began. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Bethany. Radiant, glowing, alive. She stood at the top of Ashcroft's grand staircase, her smile soft, almost ethereal, as if she were stepping into a dream. The light from the chandelier shimmered against the delicate beading of her gown, and for a moment, time felt suspended, caught in the golden haze of that perfect, fleeting second. The faint strains of music drifted through the camera's mic, soft and haunting, the signal for Bethany's descent. My breath caught as she lifted her foot to take the first step down. And then, she appeared. A woman, dark-haired, draped in a wedding gown of her own, materialized behind Bethany like a nightmare slipping through the cracks of reality. Her face was obscured, but her intent was chillingly clear. With an unnerving slowness, she raised her right arm and, with deliberate, merciless force, shoved Bethany square between the shoulder blades. Bethany never had a chance. I gasped, paralyzed, as she lurched forward, her body pitching into empty air. For a split second, her face twisted with shock, with terror, and then she was falling. The videographer didn't let the footage play past that moment. The second Bethany's feet left the stairs, he killed the video. Neither of us needed to see what came next. We had already lived it. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind struggling to piece itself back together. Who was that? I had seen her, clearly. A dark-haired bride, appearing out of nothing, her form solid, undeniable. And then, the shove. A deliberate, merciless push that sent Bethany plunging forward. My mouth hung open as fresh shock rolled over me, drowning out every rational thought. Minutes passed, but I barely felt them. Everything I had ever believed about the world crumbled under the weight of what I had just witnessed. I don't believe in ghosts. But I just saw one. I turned to the videographer, desperate for some kind of explanation, but his face was as pale and stricken as I felt. You saw her, I whispered. My voice was hoarse, uncertain. You saw her disappear as Bethany was falling, right? He swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the dark screen where the horror had just played out. I did, he said, his voice hollow. I'm afraid I did. How long have you known about this? I stuttered. Since yesterday, he replied. Yesterday? You never looked at it before yesterday? I know I sounded disbelieving. Listen, lady, I saw it the first time, I had no reason to want to watch it again on video. He sounded exasperated. Well, what made you watch it now? 'Cause to tell you the truth, I could have went forever and never saw that. I shouted. He reached over, removed the tape we had just watched and added another. Before I play this, he said, I need to give you some context. Yesterday I recorded another wedding at Ashcroft. They are still doing weddings? How could they bear to do any more weddings? I thought sadly. The video guy shrugged. Listen, that house is big and needs a lot of money for upkeep, so I doubt they have much of a choice. But that is besides the point. Just know they have banned brides from descending the stairs. Well, at least that is something. I sighed. Just watch this. He shoved the tape in and pushed play. A radiant, ginger-haired girl glided through the grand double doors, her face lit with pure joy, her smile wide and oblivious. The moment felt light, almost surreal, until the cameraman shifted his lens. As the camera panned toward the staircase, the celebration in the room seemed to fade into eerie silence. There, perched on the third step from the bottom, were two figures. The sight hit like a punch to the gut. They shouldn't have been there. They couldn't have been there. And yet, they were. The blonde one looked absolutely furious, her face twisted in exasperation as she seemed to be tearing into the brunette beside her. The cameraman paused the tape, his finger hovering over the frozen image. "Does anyone here look familiar to you?" he asked, his voice tight. I barely managed to nod. My stomach was already in knots, but I'd know that stance, that expression, that level of rage anywhere. "That's Bethany," I said, my voice uneven. I'd recognize my own personal bridezilla in any dimension. I swallowed hard, eyes drifting to the dark-haired girl beside her. But, who the hell is she? I showed the footage to the owner, and the moment he saw it, his face darkened. With a heavy sigh, he murmured, "This is exactly why I didn't want the girl using that staircase." Then, he told me the story. Back in 1928, his great-great-uncle was set to marry a woman named Maria. The wedding was perfect, until it wasn't. As Maria began her descent down that very staircase, her shoe caught in the flowing satin of her gown. She stumbled. She fell, just like Bethany. Well, not just like my cousin. Maria's fall had been a tragic accident. Bethany's? Bethany had been pushed, murdered by a woman who had been dead for nearly a century. Rage boiled up inside me. Irrational, searing fury at a ghost, a corpse long buried, and yet I wanted to scream at her, drag her from whatever shadowy afterlife she lurked in. Bethany didn't deserve this, and I couldn't accept that Maria had gotten away with it, not even in death. True, she didn't, the videographer admitted. The owner said that after Maria's fall, no bride in their family ever used the staircase again, out of superstition and respect. He exhaled, his gaze heavy with something between sorrow and inevitability. "I suppose your cousin angered her. Maybe Maria saw it as an insult, Bethany daring to make her grand entrance." I let out a slow, bitter sigh. "Well," I muttered, crossing my arms. "Now she's stuck with a bridezilla for all eternity. I hope she's happy."